Come back to the middle. Come back to the middle. Come back to the middle. Yeah. Don't make no mind about falling down, 'cause it's when you're in that valley that you see both sides more clearly. Come back to the middle. Come back to the middle. Come back to the middle. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Come back to the middle. Oh, yeah. Come back to the middle. Come back to the middle. Come back to the middle.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, come back to the middle. I'm going to come a little bit to the middle. Not quite to the middle, maybe part of the way. Always, oh, that's lovely. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday to you. What an honor to see everyone here today and to be with you and to be able to share my lessons. These are my lessons always. I always get to learn new things. As I was praying about, actually some time ago, and I set out a schedule of lessons that I was going to do, and I decided I really wanted to do a series of lessons on an amazing book that has been a really powerful influence in my life from one of my favorite Unity teachers, Eric Butterworth. And it's not as well known a book from Eric Butterworth as some of his others, but this is one called The Concentric Perspective. What's in it from me? It's a great title, huh? What's in it from me? We're going to talk a little about that and kind of explore this idea, this understanding of what it means to be in and come from a concentric perspective. So as I'm preparing things, I always listen for different stories that come up, and I came across a story about an atheist and a little boy in his neighborhood, and one day they were talking about God and church and faith, and finally the old neighbor said to the little boy, "Son, I don't see how there could be a God in this world with all of the problems that we have and all of just the terrible things." He says, "I'll give you an apple if you can prove to me that God exists." The little boy just kind of grinned at him and said, "Well, sir, I believe in God, and I'll give you 2 apples if you can prove that God doesn't exist." It's true. How can you prove that God doesn't exist? We try to find all kinds of interesting ways of proving that in life. Believe it or not, we look for the exceptions, don't we? We look out in our world and think that, oh, well, that can't be God. And that's automatically making an exception. See, in Unity, one of the things that we understand, one of the key core principles that Unity teaches is that really is only one presence and one power in the universe, in this place, and in my life, God, the absolute good. That's hard to see sometimes. But we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and what that really represents and how we can truly be in a place where there really is only that one presence. Not only in our lives, but really it starts by being in our awareness. There was a granddaughter that was sitting on Grandpa's lap, and he's reading the paper and not paying much attention to her, and she's kind of studying his wrinkled face, and his old face, and she got up and had the nerve to come up and rub the wrinkles on his face and with his little fingers, and finally says, "Grandpa," she says, "did God make you?" He said, "Well, sure he did, honey, a long time ago." "Well, did God make me?" "Well, yes, he made you not too long ago." She says, "Boy, he sure did get better, didn't he?" We tell these stories about God and about the divine, and the way we talk about God and divine is really from an external perspective. Do you realize that? I love telling stories like this, and they're funny and they're fun, and they kind of demonstrate really different things, but really it's important to recognize when we tell the stories like this, we're still saying that God is out there. And so part of what we're trying to get people to get into an understanding and really begin to identify with is that there really is only one presence and one power in this universe. And that is in you as well. that same presence and power that we attribute to all of the great, wonderful miracles in life exists within the very essence of your being. In St. John chapter 4, verse 24, it says, "For God is spirit, and those that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." In spirit and in truth. Sometimes it's really challenging to understand what it means to be in spirit. And that's because spirit is something beyond rational, logical, intellectual understanding. You realize that? In many ways, it's our trying to figure out spirit that gets in the way of spirit. It's the intellect oftentimes that blocks us from really truly experiencing the essence of who and what we are and our connection with that greater essence of life, of love, of being, of power, of presence. I came across a verse in Ezekiel, and he says, "My servant David will be king over them, and they will have one shepherd, and they will walk in my ordinances and keep my statutes and observe them. And they will live on the land that I give to Jacob, my servant, in which my fathers lived. And they will live on it, and their sons and their sons and sons forever. And David, my servant, will be their king forever. And I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an everlasting covenant with them. And I will place them and multiply them, and I will set my sanctuary in their midst forever." Now, there's been translations of this that say that I will put my sanctuary among them. But I'm going to suggest to you that's a mistranslation. I will put my sanctuary in their midst. Now, you might say, well, he's talking about the tribe of Israel. But symbolically, metaphysically, you need to understand that you are the tribe of Israel. Whether you were born into that tribe physically or not, the idea, the understanding of Israel is that spiritual nature of who and what you and I come here to be and what we are all about. And so the tribe of Israel is really the spiritual awakening of each and every one of us. And the sanctuary is that place in which the divine resides. Well, guess what? That sacred, beautiful, absolutely magnificent sanctuary, we come into this place, and I love this place, and I want you to know it is, to me, a very sacred sanctuary. I love this sanctuary. I love the coming together that we have, and the energy that is created here, and the power that's created here. But that energy and that power that's created here that we see out here only shines because we have it in here. And if we don't have that sanctuary in here, which we do, whether we know it or not, whether we choose to enter into it or not, we always have that sanctuary of the divine within us. And so part of coming from a place of the concentric perspective is really always remembering to return back into that sanctuary, that place within our very nature and our very being. Eric has some beautiful insights about this whole understanding. He calls it concentrics. He said the concentric perspective deals with a fundamental process in human existence that is rarely considered in the study of metaphysics. The process is both simple and profound, but if you can really grasp the idea, it will lead a whole new dimension to your awareness and your relationship to the universe and to your practices in truth. And further down he says, we sometimes call ourselves truth seekers. But the truth is, there is no truth seekers. There is no truth that needs seeking. We must first learn not to seek out there, for when we seek, there is a tendency to go window shopping, and thus to achieve a consciousness that is patchwork, and he calls it a patchwork of metaphysical slogans. We get all kinds of wonderful metaphysical slogans. But truth is within, not something to search for, but something to awaken to and release. Not something to search for, but to awaken to and release. How many of you came here this morning because you thought you were going to get something? In all honesty, I got news for you. He didn't come here to get something. What he's teaching us is that we didn't come here to get something, because the something that we're looking for is already in us. The truth of the matter is there's absolutely nothing missing in your life. If you believe that there's something missing in your life, you've just missed the mark. It's called sinning. You guys know that term? The Bible calls it a sin. Oh my God, that's a horrible thing, right? We can't do that. That automatically means that we're, quote, sinners. There's no such thing as a sinner. Doesn't exist. This idea of sin simply is an archery term. And the archery term, when you take an arrow, a bow and arrow, and you try to shoot at a target, and you miss the bullseye, that's called a sin. You've missed the mark. It's an error in thinking. It's an error in consciousness. It's an error in our belief system. And so just the very act of thinking that there's something missing in our lives is an error in consciousness. Because the reality is we live and move and have our being in the divine. And so part of our working to practice this understanding, this concentric perspective, is really showing up in life not for the purpose of seeing what there is for us to get, but to see what it is within us that is there for us to give. What am I being called upon in this circumstance, in this situation, with this person and with these people, or in this life, or in this country, or in this world? What is it I am being called to give forth, to express? He says, you exist, which means to stand forth. And you are the activity of God expressing or pressing out into visibility. And to experience a balanced life, an attitude of confidence and courage, it is important to continually return to this center and to deal with life concentrically. You've heard me say, the teacher, the young novice came to the student and said, how is it that you're always so centered? And the master said, never centered, always returning to center. And this returning to center is really returning to that place where we are open to and really open to an understanding and a consciousness and awareness of our oneness and our connection with that divine presence that is the very essence of our nature and our being. When you think about concentric, sometimes we think about it, it's really having to do with circles. St. Augustine said this. He said, God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Let me say that again, because it's a wonderful thing to meditate on and contemplate. God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Center is everywhere. That means that the center of the divine is in that chair that you're in right now. You realize that? And can you begin to look and see yourself and to see life from that perspective? That everything that is going on in your world, in your life, is there and is showing up at a creative process that you are the center of. Eric, in other works that he writes, says, we don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. And so the concentric perspective is really beginning to make that shift from one of what's in it for me to begin to recognize and ask this question, what's in it from me? What's going on in this circumstance, situation, and yes, even world that is in some way emanating from my consciousness, from what's happening in me, in my world, in my inner world? Because I can tell you, whatever's going on in my inner world is going to show up somehow out here in the outer world. It is. And what we see and experience out here in the outer world, in some way, is a reflection of something that's happening with us internally. And if we begin to make those changes and shifts within ourselves internally, we may not see instant change, but we will see change. Things will change. Sometimes it doesn't change the way we think we want it to. That's kind of the problem, is we want change and we want everybody else to do it. right? We want the world to do it. We want everything else out here to make the change. But Eric says, you live in an environment that you do not see. You live in an environment that you do not see. You see things, but you probably do not really see reality. Can a fish see water? Can a person see God? You are environed by God, and you live, move, and have your being in God. So, Charles, do we have that one slide that I sent over? Did you get a chance to get those in there? Let's see if it... There it is. All right. This is an analogy or an image that Eric points to and kind of describes in the book. And he says, take two X's and look at two cones, basically. And we have here being, which is the divine, which is all that is, which is the existence of all things, which is, you might say, existence. That which is, it exists. It is. And we have, pushing through this point, existence, being me, being you. And at the very center of this is our connection with that divine. Now, sometimes this is what Paul referred to as Christ in you, your hope of glory. Jesus came to show us this point. His purpose, his identity, his expression, his expressing his existence out in life was to help each of us to return to an understanding of that wonderful, amazing connection that we have at the meeting of those two cones, of the absolute transcendent nature of the creative process and of the divine coming in and through the very essence of our hearts, our minds, our being. When we talk about ourself, the reality is we have a self with a small s. You've heard of this, I'm sure. Self with a small s, which is our personality, and that's really more on, the farther we get out to this area, that's where we get into the seeing things and looking at the world and experiencing life through the small s. But the closer we come here, back to this point, right there, that's where we experience S, self, with the larger S. And this is that divine nature within the very essence of our being. And life happens by this expressing through that point out into here. And it is a process of giving forth. That's part of the work of concentrics. Concentrics is really an understanding that life is happening not to you, but through you. Life is happening not to you, but through you. We had an interesting conversation in our men's group yesterday, and one of the members had mentioned, Joe, help me remember who we were talking about yesterday. Sorry, I had to call him out. We were talking about the concentration camp.
Victor Frankl.
Thank you, Victor Frankl. The name wasn't coming to me. Now it came through. Thank you. Victor Frankl. Many of you know the story of Victor Frankl, who was in a German concentration camp for many, many years. And the thing about that is he saw people around him who were succumbing to the horrors of being in that concentration camp. But somehow he managed to come out of that really without having the kind of wounds or the kind of horrible scarring that so many actually did come out of that with, and some didn't come out at all, of course. And the question really came up, well, how is it that he was able to go through that experience and not have the same kind of traumatic wounds and pain and how was he able to do that? In his wonderful book, Man's Search for Meaning, one of the things that he points out is that he realized at one point that he he had a choice, and he had a power within him to make a decision. And that's something that no one out here could take away from him. And so the decision he made was not to be a victim. He made a choice that regardless of what they did out here, it didn't change how he was able to respond. And he made a choice about how he was going to respond regardless of what was done to him or what he saw or experienced. Now that's an extreme, I understand, but you need to recognize that you and I have that power within us, and that is we have the power to choose how we are going to see and experience life, ourselves, our world. That's the power that we truly have. It's called consciousness, and consciousness is always a choice. And what we have consciousness of, we do bring more into our experiences in life. And what we have consciousness of, we express more of out into life. So one of the things Eric points out is that life can only be lived from the within out. And when you catch the idea of living from within you, you realize that life is a giving process. For God so loved the world that he gave. We are in this place of being given. The divine is being given through us. And the truth is that God is an ever-available all-sufficiency which we experience as we consciously give way to that divine flow. Give way. Part of the work is giving way. Giving way. Giving way to having life be the way we think it's supposed to be. Now, wait a minute. We get pretty attached to our view and opinion of how life is supposed to be, don't we? I know I do. I have this idea of how everything is supposed to be. And I resist when it's not the way I think it's supposed to be. And yet that's the very thing that gets in the way of having life show up in a way that's perhaps even better, greater, more powerful, more significant. So the moment I become attached to how things are supposed to be, that attachment in and of itself is a block in our divine flow. I get really attached to things, I want you to know. I do. And I'm trying, this is my lesson, I think, in many ways. Part of my lesson in life is to learn to let go. I don't know if anybody else has that lesson or not, but it is a big part of my lesson in life, is learning how to let go. To really trust that there's something that is showing up in my life for a greater, not reason, but a greater purpose. This is part of our conversation yesterday also. It's interesting, that came out yesterday. Someone was talking about, sharing about having expectations and letting go of all expectations. And what occurs to me is, I believe that's not possible. I don't think it's possible not to have expectations. You see, we have this thing up here called a mind and a brain. And recently, Brian Kurtz, who's going to do a wonderful workshop coming up here soon, Brian Kurtz shared something with me that really spoke to me. And one of the things he pointed out is that, we have this thing in here called a heart. We all have it. I know you may not realize it sometimes, but we have it. We sometimes forget. But we have this thing here called a heart, and one of the primary purposes of the heart is to pump blood and energy and life through our system, and to keep it going, and keep it circulating, and keep it flowing. That's the power of the heart, and that's the importance of the heart. And that's one of the things that we're talking about here, is in many ways, that's part of what we're here to do also, is to keep life and God and the divine flowing through life, through experiences. But we also have another organ, which is an interesting little organ called the brain. And the purpose of the brain is to pump out thoughts. And it does it whether you like it or not. Have you noticed that? Have you ever tried to stop your heart from beating? You can slow it down. I can slow mine down pretty significantly, but boy, even when you think you've gotten it stopped, it never stops, actually. I know these yogis who have, they can't even find a heartbeat, but the reality is when they really, really measure really deep, there's a slight little heartbeat there always. The reality is we have this brain that's always pumping out thoughts. And sometimes those thoughts are valuable and important, and sometimes they're just thoughts. And they have nothing to do with us or anything else. They just kind of show up there sometimes because we're part of this thing called grace consciousness. And the brain is basically a receiver and a transmitter. Do you realize that? The brain is a receiver and a transmitter. And we're continually taking in thoughts, and we're actually continually putting out thoughts. And if we become attached to a particular thought, belief system, attitude, understanding, that's kind of like, he calls it mental cholesterol. It clogs things up. It backs things up. It blocks our awareness. It blocks our flow. Part of our work also is to, I know that part of our understanding is to, and our work is to begin to let go of how we've been seeing ourselves and how we've been seeing the divine in our life and world. That's challenging sometimes. I came across, you see, we've been all taught certain ideas and awarenesses about God and about the divine, haven't we? We've been taught that somehow that God is this being up there, out there. And, you know, an old traditional view, of course, is God is the old man with a long white beard. Mine's short, by the way. Long white beard, sitting up on a throne in this place, in the clouds called heaven. And on some level, I would say in terms of race consciousness, that image is kind of still burned into race consciousness. It's challenging to let go of that in some ways. We think we've let go of it, but the reality is we still are looking at God being something out there. Now, don't get me wrong. The divine is everywhere. And so the divine is out there. But we don't really make real connection with the divine out there. The way we really make connection with the divine is in that sanctuary, by returning to that place. And we do that, of course, through our times of stillness, of meditation, of prayer. And then when we do that, there is an inpouring or an outpouring or a flow that comes through us of inspiration, of awareness, of understanding, of peace of mind, of all of these amazing divine qualities of spirit. And if we're open to doing that, then we find ourselves no longer running around looking for love in all the wrong places, looking for love in too many faces. You guys know that one?
Yeah.
Or looking for money in all the wrong places, looking for money in too many faces. We stop making things out here our God. We stop making things out here our source. Looking for life in all the wrong places, looking for life in too many places. Or health. You get the picture. The more we turn inward to really tune into that place within us that is the essence of our wholeness, that is the place within us where we are already whole and complete and filled with that unique divine nature, with the beingness of the oneness of the divine, then it begins to radiate and emanate through us in ways that we perhaps had never thought possible or imagined. And then when you come from that place of looking at our experiences in life, looking at the possibilities in life, from a place of knowing that life is happening through me, instead of asking the question, what am I here to get in this circumstance or situation, in this conflict, in this political climate, what am I here to get? Begin to ask this question, what am I here to give? What is it that the universe, spirit, being, the divine, is trying to share through me? And if you ask that question, there's a little bubble of awareness that will begin to happen. And you begin to see, and little insights will begin to rise up. And if you look at it and kind of go, nah, not that. I'm not doing that. No way. You can bet that's the one. That's the one that's being expressed through you. If you're in a hurt or painful situation in a relationship, and you're asking the question, hey, what am I supposed to get out? What am I getting out of this? You're asking the wrong question. Believe me, I know I've asked that question a lot. Julie will attest to that. Probably others will too. But if I really turn back to that place in me where I know that there's something within me that is trying to be expressed from the very core and center of my nature and center of my being, and if I will ask that question, what's in this from me? And what is mine here to give? It may be that mine to give is to forgive. It may be that mine to give is to give of my time, my talent, my treasure. May be that mine is to give of myself in some way. Maybe it is mine to it is to give up my way of thinking and my need to be right. No, I can't do that. I am right about that, by the way. See, it's about letting go of the mental cholesterol, the emotional cholesterol, those things that are blocking us from truly knowing and experiencing this flow from the very center and core of our nature. And boy, when we do that, it's amazing what a different world we live in. So what is yours to give? You know the circumstance I'm talking about. It popped up in your head when I was talking about this, right? We all got them. We all have places where we have blocked the flow in our life in some way. So ask yourself this wonderful question at the very heart of your nature and being. What's in this for me to give? And listen. And when you hear what that is, don't stop there. Take action. Take a step. Even if it's a small step, a baby step, an ant step. Take a step. And when you do, be ready for miracles. That's our lesson for today. Let's move into our meditation time. Breathing into that heart space and allowing the thoughts to just be there and just observe them. And just allow them to be. Allow them to be. It's not necessary to change them or regulate them. Just observe and notice. And in the very act of observing and noticing those thoughts, just breathe in and out. And just notice the one who is observing. And just be aware. I have thoughts, but I am not my thoughts. And just allow yourself to relax into the one who is noticing and observing the thoughts. And feel from that place. Feel the connection, the stillness, the silence, the peace. And if you notice any sensations, just observe and notice the sensations and just allow yourself to observe from that place and know that I have sensations, but I'm not these sensations. They're just little signals and messages, and I thank them for being there, but know that I am more than these sensations. Just breathe into that awareness of being the one who notices sensations. And if you notice any emotions, give thanks for those and just breathe into them and allow them to be, and just observe them. Let yourself be the awareness of emotions. And know this in the very essence of your being. Feel a place in you of I am. And breathe into that, into the heart space, and give thanks of that point between being you. That point of God expressing as you, through you, being that creative energy and power that God is at the very point of your being. Breathing and relaxing and trusting and knowing and letting God, the divine, be God in you as the very essence of your nature, and expressing in and with and through that point. Listen for what is yours to express, to give, to share. At the center of all being, at the center of all life, I am. And nothing can disturb me here. And from this center, I go forth to love and to serve. Breathe in that knowing and that blessing, and breathe it forth into whatever life situation you see show up. It's there for you to share and give. And it's already there in you to give. And give thanks for all that is needed is already present. And so it is. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Blessed Spirit. And so it is. Take a nice deep breath. Move back to an awareness of this time and place. Take another nice deep breath. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. And be here and now in that connection. And so it is. Thank you, God.